Groomed to be a Bride is a foster carer memoir from Maggie Hartley. This was released originally in 2020, and I believe I read it when it was first released. Decided to reread it again, and honestly, it's quite different to the average foster carer memoir. Not bad different, but definitely an interesting read. And it starts off quite interestingly because the child in question has the upper hand, which never happens. But this young girl, 15-year-old girl called Halima, is found trying to get into the back of a truck. And she's obviously taken in by social services, but she doesn't speak any English. So they don't know who she is, where she's come from, whether her parents are in this country. They have no information, so they can't do anything other than let Maggie care for her, give her a protective, safe environment, and that's it. And the entire thing revolves around her finally feeling comfortable and willing to share some information. But how long that's going to take, well, I'm not going to say it, but that never ever happens. The child is never in control of the situation. Not that Halima would feel like she's in control of things, but it definitely made things quite interesting, and I imagine quite frustrating if you're social services and you can't do anything other than care for the child. You can't plan things, you can't try and reach out to other people, you just have to wait. And that must be really frustrating. And obviously, as the narrative progresses, we learn more about Halima and where she came from. We know she's from Iraq. We learn this quite early. And we begin to learn about what life was like for her. And I don't want to go into any details, but it's the descriptions are dark, very, very dark, very well written, but very disturbing. And then the narrative takes a potentially dangerous turn. I don't want to say too much about that. Honestly, I feel like the title kind of spoiled things and gave things away. It gave a little bit too much away for my liking, but I won't say what's involved or what happens. But my comment there is that I wish the title hadn't been so revealing so early on, because I knew I was expecting something to happen, even though I didn't know quite what that would be. And I feel like that took away some of the anticipation. But that aside, it is very well written. It's very, very eye opening. And I also think it's very sensitively written. It goes into some information about how some Muslims are extremist, and I think that the book does a very good job of making it very clear that that's not normal for Muslims. Most Muslims are not extremist, and I think anybody reading it would never get the idea that the book was saying Muslims are bad. Absolutely not at all. I think it's very respectful, and it does a very good job of striking that balance of providing facts without trying to imply that certain people are bad just because they follow a religion. I'm very pleased with how they did that, from my perspective at least. So I enjoyed reading it for the right reasons, insofar as it's gripping, compelling. It's great to see that there was actually help there for Halima, rather than her just being turned away. But at the same time, it is quite dark. It's very, very dark. In fact, I'd say it's one of the darkest, most descriptive foster care memoirs I've ever read. It is really different. If you've never read any foster care memoir, start with this if you want, but it's not typical of what the average foster care memoir is like. So if you do read this one first, and you don't like it for any reason, just bear in mind that most of the others are nothing like this. But just because it's different, it doesn't mean it's bad. It is an emotional roller coaster once it gets going. It is quite slow to begin with, because obviously, as with Maggie in social services, we don't know that much about the situation. But I think that mystery element allowed me to quite easily get through the slowness to begin with. It's a good book. It's generally well written. It is unpredictable. As I said, the title is not the best, but obviously that went with the shock factor. And that aside, there were no complaints from me at all. It's definitely worth a read. It's one where actually I might read it again at some point. This is the second time I've read it. It wouldn't surprise me if I decided to read it again in 3-4+ years time. It's definitely got a lot of benefit, very educational about a lot of different things, and very well written. So ultimately, no real complaints from me, and it is one that I recommend.